first one was fine, George. That last one was
yeah.
What did you say for do it? Don't think on.
Don't think so, no. Because it's just that it's so vast.
Have you ever heard of a Beatles recording technique called Varispeed? It's one of their most well-known recording techniques. They used it to record songs like Rain, I'm Only Sleeping, Yellow Submarine, Back in the USSR and many others. Depending on purpose, they could use a specific function of the tape recorders that allowed the tape to run at half speed, which is the one that they use, for example, for the solo of In My Life. Or a specific procedure that at the time they called frequency control and most recently Varispeed, that could finally adjust the speed of the tape. I was recently working on a video about the arrangement of Help, where I meant to show how the parts that they created and played, perfectly interlocked together. When I got to Harrison's lead guitar part, and I found myself struggling to recreate his sound, especially in the intro and especially in the famous descending arpeggio. Please note that this is not just about cloning the tone of the guitar. This is also and mainly about recreating the unusual and unique attack and percussive separation of the notes, which stands as a hallmark of this brilliant George guitar line. It was the start of a venture that, in the end, enabled me to recreate George's sound in the intro like this. Sounds so close to being incredible, I totally agree, sounds incredible to me as well. But what's more incredible is how I got to recreate this part this way. I had to go against all my beliefs on how the song was recorded. And what's even more incredible is that what I discovered is backed up by a chat among the Beatles that I'm going to show you in a while and seems to have gone completely unnoticed until now, where they themselves speculate about what I have found. The introduction of the song plays a crucial role in grabbing the listener's attention and convincing them to listen to the rest of the song. One of the catchiest ever introductions of any Beatles song, at least in my humble opinion, is the one of Help. Help, I need somebody. A significant impact of this introduction are the single notes and the famous iconic descending line played by George Harrison, which, in my opinion, are one of his most brilliant contributions to a Beatles song. As I said before, I was working on a video about the arrangement of Help when I found myself struggling to reproduce George Harrison guitar sound in the introduction. I picked up my Gretsch guitar to play this iconic line because this is the one that we all believe George had used. I don't own a Gretsch Tennessn original vintage guitar, I own an electromatic version of this guitar. I use my skills as a guitar maker to modify this Gretsch to sound as close to a vintage one as possible. So what I did is I swapped out the pickups with Hylotrons, the original vintage pickups. I moved the pickups, especially the bridge one, to the exact position along the scale of the guitar where they are originally. I also replaced the bridge with a brass one made by a friend of mine to original vintage specs and dimensions. So let's take a few seconds to compare my sound to the original Gretsch Tennessn sound. This is the sound of our original Gretsch Tennessn. And this is my modified Gretsch Electromatic. As you heard, the two guitars sound almost identical, so I was ready to run a few comparison tests by using my Gretsch and comparing it to the sound of the final record. After a few attempts to reproduce George's sound in the introduction, especially on the descending line, three things became immediately evident. First, the sound of a Gretsch Tennessn didn't align at all with the sound that George had on the final recording, on the real record. Second, the lick wasn't played in alternate picking. It was played using a 3 downstroke, 1 upstroke plucking. Third, what struck me most deeply, however, was the difficulty I experienced in capturing the almost mechanical attack and very tight percussive separation of the notes of this descending line. This becomes even more evident if you try recording the part yourself and then compare yours with the original in a very quick A-B test. The 3 downstroke, 1 upstroke technique compared to the alternate picking helped achieving sort of this effect, especially if you pluck it very hard. But it was still enough to capture the percussive and distinctive character of his descending line. As you can imagine, this left me quite puzzled. So, to be completely sure, I asked a few friends I stay in contact with to please send me their recordings of the descending arpeggio with the original Gretsch Tennessn. But those didn't match either. However, my Gretsch guitar tone and their Gretsch guitar tone reminded me of something I've heard before, which is worth remembering. At this point I was stunned with this kind of feeling that you get when you are facing a leap into the unknown. If the sound of the Gretsch Tennessn didn't align with George's sound on the final record of Help, which guitar did George use on Help? Of course he had other guitars available in the studio in this specific period, more 6 strings. He had the Rickenbacker 425, the Gretsch Duo Jet, the Gretsch Country Gentleman, the acoustic J160E and the Stratocaster. I ruled out a few models that George used in the pre-Beatles mania era, and I ruled out the Gibson and the Rickenbacker 425 because I have used them extensively lately, and I know they wouldn't fit. I made a few tests with the Duo Jet as well, here they are for you to listen, but they didn't match either. I tried the Gretsch Country Gentleman as well, but the humbuckers didn't fit. I have to admit that the Stratocaster was the last guitar that I considered, but given the Beatles' constant pursuit of new sounds and their eagerness to always experiment with new instruments, the Stratocaster that George and John had just bought a few weeks before the recording of Help should probably have been my first choice. In fact, I tried this for the famous single notes in the intro, and the sound fit perfectly the one of the record. That was both encouraging and confusing at the same time. Could it be that George used the Stratocaster for recording the descending line as well? And this is where the story started to take an unexpected turn. Do you remember when we said the descending line is recorded using 3 downstroke and 1 upstroke and not alternate picking? Well, this, at the speed the original arpeggio is recorded, requires a certain amount of skills. I began to question if George himself might have encountered the same difficulties in playing this arpeggio. And as we'll soon discover in a while, from his own words, he actually did. So might he have used this frequency control tape speed reduction trick to play the lick at a lower tape speed more comfortably? One thing I've learned over the years when I try to reproduce these Beatles beats is something that I noticed they also used and I propose you also try out. What I do is I completely blank my mind. I try everything, even the most counterintuitive thing. At first my attempts were so-so, but after a few hours of experimenting I suddenly realized that I had cloned the specific attack of the original sound, which was without any doubt the typical sound of the bridge pickup of a Stratocaster, this one. And you know how I did that? I did that by tuning the Strat down 1 full step, slowing down the speed of the backing track 1 full step as well, playing the arpeggio at a lower key, which means a lower speed, speeding it back up and compressing everything. But I noticed that something was still missing. Slowing down the part and speeding it back up helped separating the notes, but not quite as much as the original. My arpeggio notes felt cluttered, with the decays blending together rather than remaining crisp and distinct like the original. I had recently worked on a few videos where I unexpectedly noticed that the strings that the instruments the Beatles were using were muted. I referred to the lesson about the bass of Come Together, which I recently posted. And another video I'm working now about the recording of I Wanna Hold Your Hand, where George played during the middle eight with his Gretsch country gentleman, using some muting as well. So I had this idea. I slipped some paper under the lower three strings of the arpeggio, the A, the D and the G, leaving the B string ringing freely. Sort as you see George Martin doing in the Get Back movie during the recording of For You Blue, where he used some newspapers to mute the strings of Paul's piano. And bang! That was it, exactly like the original. Listen. Some of you might be skeptical about George using muting, but George was familiar with muting, since both his Gretsch country gentleman guitars were equipped with a muting device. They also couldn't have used the palm muting technique, not only because it wasn't known at the time, but primarily because all photos show that their Stratocaster was equipped with a ashtray vibrato cover on it, at least until November 1965 during the recording of Rubber Soul. Now, on one hand I was very excited, on the other hand I felt like someone who knows they have no chance at all to be believed. Help was not listed among the songs that the Beatles recorded using Varispeed. Everybody thinks they used the Gretsch Tennessn and not the Stratocaster, not to mention the matter of the muting. The whole situation sounded very bizarre. It was a lot to take in for the day, so I decided to call it a night. But before I went to sleep, I wrote a few friends I stay in contact with. And I wrote them, look, I think that George might have recorded the descending line of the Help at a lower speed. And hold on tight, probably by muting the strings as well. The next day I woke up and found tons of emails stating that it was completely gone. But among them was an email by Mike Brown, co-author with Jeffrey Aron of the book Hearing Aids to the Beatles and owner of the What Goes On website, which I suggest you visit, which contained a mysterious sentence. This is what you're looking for. Attached to this email was a transcript of a chat among the Beatles during the early takes of the song, which I'm going to show you in a while, revealing something unexpected that nobody seems to have noticed before that supported my findings. For those who are unfamiliar with the terminology, a take refers to an attempt to successfully record a song, usually an instrumental backing track to which later the vocals and other instruments are added. So let's imagine we can travel back in time and sit back there on a stool in a corner of Studio 2 and observe the recording of all the takes as they unfold. What will we see?
Help! Take one.
Take one stops when John snaps a string and Ringo calls a halt.
Take two.
Take two is aborted by George Martin due to the difficulties that George is encountering in playing the descending line. And this should remind you of something.
Three.
Take three is aborted due to John switching chords.
Four.
Before we get to take four, which is where the story starts to become interesting, we already noticed a few important things. First, George is actually having difficulties in playing the descending line at the speed and the tempo of the song. He will have no time to rehearse this part. The entire Help recording session, and this is crazy by today's standards, from the creation of the instrumental backing track, 9 takes, other 3 takes for the vocals and other overdubbings, and the tape-to-tape bounce reduction lasted 4 hours, from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. On April 22, so 9 days after the recording of Help, we can clearly see George playing the descending line in 3 downstroke, 1 upstroke, during the filming of the opening scene of the Help movie, where the Beatles are performing in playback, the title track. The recording was very recent, so we can assume this is likely how he played the part in the studio. By this time he had had time to practice the part. However, from what I found, during live performances he opted for simplified versions of this specific line and mostly playing them in alternate picking. Do you remember when we spoke about the sound of the Gretsch Tennessean didn't align with the one of a final record, but reminded me of something? Well, the sound that George features in these early takes of the song, which is completely different from the one he will have in the final version of the song, the one that we all know, very likely matches the one of the Gretsch Tennessean played with flat wound strings very close to the bridge, like in the audio samples I showed you before. Listen. So, what happened in the meantime? The Beatles themselves tell us. At the end of take 3, George Martin is heard talking from the control room, expressing to George some doubts about the descending arpeggio, and suggesting that they could perhaps record it later.
The first one was fine, John. That last one was
Yeah.
What did they say for do evidently though?
George replies that the line is just a bit too fast.
Don't think so, no, because it's just that it's so fast.
The recording stops, and when it starts again, we can hear George talking to the other Beatles, saying that he's worried about the fact that if they postpone the recording of the descending line, he will have to play it while singing, which will be even harder.
We want to double track the voices, don't we? So I'll have to double track singing it. I'll have to do this bit singing, which is going to be even harder still.
No, we've got 2 voice tracks.
Yeah,
we can double track
we're
the
going to
voices
double
on.
track the voice.
However, Paul, who seems to be the only one with a clear idea of how the recording will function in terms of assigned tracks, reassures George by saying that they will have 2 tracks for the vocals, meaning that George will have a dedicated track to record the descending line. The recording stops, and when it starts again, they have some way agreed that they will record the descending line later. So from take 4, George will no longer play the descending line. Paul suggests that somebody keeps the beat in the empty space where the arpeggio will be overdubbed, to help George keep in the tempo. And listen what he says.
I mean, just keep so that if we do half it, tap a beat. If we do half it.
To halve means dividing in 2. And do you remember when we spoke about at the beginning of the video about that recording technique that the Beatles used, using a specific function of the tape recorder that allowed them to run the tape at half speed? Is Paul suggesting here that they will record the descending line at a lower tape speed to facilitate George playing it? While George is still confused about what's happening, John tries to point out that he's already beating the tempo in the empty space where the descending line will be recorded, most probably to help himself to start again with the guitar.
Well, I'm all good.
Yeah, but it's something you can hear on the track.
Paul insists that the tapping must be done so that it's audible in the recording. John again emphasizes that he's already beating the tempo there, and this is the turning point. Listen to what Paul says.
Well, I do that. Anyway.
Oh, okay then. Well, that's it.
Even if I
I
do
just
it.
meant for when it's slowed down, you're not going to. When it's slowed down.
Paul is now clearly stating that they previously agreed that the descending line will be recorded at a lower speed. The emerging scenario here seems to be that, to make things easier for George, he will stop playing the descending line now and will record it later at a lower speed on a dedicated track. And my attempt to recreate the part seems to also demonstrate that. Now, here is worth taking a moment and look at the situation a bit closer. The list of songs where the Beatles employed these specific recording techniques is well known, and is widely accepted that the first time that used it was for the recording of Rain in 1966, even though this technology was available at Abbey Road Studios long before. The information about the use of Varispeed primarily comes from the session notes that George Martin and the sound engineer, in this case Norman Smith, wrote during the recording. However, we hear from Ken Townsend, one of the most trusted sound engineers at Abbey Road, that this may not be always a reliable source. This chat that we just heard seems to demonstrate that the Beatles tried the Varispeed technique 1 year before Rain in 1965 during the recording of Help. The recording of Help was also officially the first time that the Beatles tried linking 2 tape recorders for bouncing tracks. Why couldn't this also be the same for the Varispeed technique, the first time they tried that? We can't be sure of how much they slowed down the recording. For every 6% lower the tape goes, that's 1 semitone to drop. Without getting too technical, there is a limit of how much you can lower the tension of the strings, especially light gauge strings, which I proposed in previous videos the Beatles used. But we can assume that they did that just enough for George to play the part comfortably. In my recreation, I tuned down my guitar 1 full step. Lowering the tuning further will make the part even easier to play, and the notes of the sending lick even more separated and distinct. But the strings will become too loose, like bad cooked Italian spaghetti. It's time to focus on how careful, dedicated and painstaking were the Beatles in researching the sounds and arranging the parts. We see George changing guitar from the Gretsch Tennessn in the early takes of a song to the Stratocaster, which gave the signature sound to the stunning, brilliant introduction of Help. We see them experimenting with 2 tape recorders to have more tracks available for recording. We see them slowing down the tape to make it easier for George to play some parts. Can you guess how much complex and elaborated that was in the 60s with the limited equipment they had available? Nowadays we have endless tracks to experiment whatever we want, but at the time that was very, very hard to do. We've reached the end of this video. I would like to thank you for following me so far, and I hope you appreciated the effort of providing you with some unique and somewhat historical insights about the Beatles. If you have questions about this you want to talk about, please put them in the comments below. To get notified when new videos are out, please hit the bell button, and please consider to support this channel, because making this video is very long time spending, and I would like to be able to make more of them in the future. So have fun yourself. I'll see you next time. Ciao!